Can you believe we're on the last chapter of Midnight on the Moon? Chapter 10. Remember in chapter 9 they found Morgan, and she explained the whole thing to them, that they hadn't even really had to go on the moon and get off. They could have left the second they got there, but that they had a big adventure. And she talked a little about Merlin, who always played tricks on her. And then, do you remember what happened when Annie opened the book and she pointed at where she wanted to go? And she said the treehouse spun and spun and spun and spun, and then everything was absolutely still, but only for a moment. Brings us to the last chapter, chapter 10, Earth Life. The midnight woods woke up. A breeze rustled the leaves. An owl hooted. The sounds were soft, but very alive. Jack opened his eyes. He pushed his glasses into place, and he smiled. Morgan was still with them. He could see her in the moonlight. Her long white hair was shining. Morgan, can you and the treehouse stay here, said Annie, in Frog Creek? No, I must leave again, I'm afraid, said Morgan. I've been gone from Camelot for a long time. She handed Jack his pack. She brushed his cheek. Her hand felt soft and cool. A bit of moon dust still on you, she said. Thank you, Jack, for your great love of knowledge. You're welcome, said Jack. Morgan tugged on one of Annie's braids. And thank you, Annie, for your belief in the impossible. You're welcome, said Annie. Go home now, said Morgan. Jack smiled. Home was Earth, that bright, colorful world where everything was alive and always changing. Bye, Morgan, said Annie. She started out of the treehouse. Jack looked back at Morgan. Will you come back soon, he said. Anything can happen, said Morgan. The universe is filled with wonders, isn't it, Jack? He smiled and nodded. Go now, Morgan said softly. And Jack followed Annie down the rope ladder. He stepped onto the ground, and the wind started to howl. The tree started to shake. A loud roar filled Jack's ears. He squeezed his eyes shut. He covered his ears, and then everything was silent and still. Jack opened his eyes. The ladder was gone. He looked through the leaves and the branches of the great oak tree. Where the treehouse had been, it was only moonlight now. Bye, Morgan, he whispered sadly. Bye, Peanut, said Annie. Jack and Annie stared at the top of the tree for a long moment. Ready, said Annie. Jack nodded, and they started for home. The midnight air felt cool and moist. It was filled with the soft sounds of earth life. Jack and Annie left the Frog Creek woods. They started down their street. Annie glanced up at the sky. The moon looks really far away, doesn't it? It did, thought Jack. It was. I wonder how that moon man can be up there all alone, said Annie. What do you mean, said Jack. I mean, who helps him put on a spacesuit, and who helps him get up when he falls down? And who is he, added Jack. Who do you think he was, said Annie. He must be a scientist or an astronaut from Earth, said Jack. No, I think he's an alien, said Annie, from another galaxy. Jack scoffed. What makes you say that? I just feel it, said Annie. Wrong, said Jack. There's no proof that aliens exist. Maybe not now, said Annie. But don't forget, we were in the future. Oh, brother, said Jack, and they crossed their yard. And they climbed their back steps. Annie tiptoed inside of the house, and Jack followed. Before he shut the door, he glanced up at the moon. Was Annie right? He wondered. Could the moon man have come from another galaxy? Morgan's words came back to him. The universe is filled with wonders, isn't it, Jack? Good night, Moon Man, Jack whispered. And then he closed the door. And that is the end of the last chapter of Midnight on the Moon, which is a Magic Treehouse series. And the next one is coming up very shortly, Afternoon on the Amazon. Look for some follow-up exercises to, well, you know what? I actually do have two that have to do with aliens, too, because the last chapter raised some questions, so we need to answer them. See you later.